Here we are once again, the end of another series of retrospectives. We've covered the greats and, well, still the pretty damn goods, but now we're finally here. The conclusion to the Darksiders series so far, Darksiders Genesis. Now, I made it no secret in my video on Darksiders 3 that back in 2018, I was left pretty disappointed by Darksiders' return to the gaming sphere. I didn't think it was a bad game, but at the time, just was not my cup of tea, and so when I first saw Darksiders Genesis's reveal trailer in mid-2019, I'll be honest, my first thought was, what the hell is this? Finally, a game with the final horseman, and we get this spin-off that looked like they traded in the formula to pursue some Diablo-esque game. Despite that reaction though, I did still pick up Darksiders Genesis day one with, those abysmally low expectations. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I was certain it was going to be yet another disappointing entry in the Darksiders series. Well, I was completely wrong, because whilst it took me a mission or two to get into the game, I truly adored playing Genesis. I loved the story, the gameplay still felt like a true Darksiders experience despite the change of perspective, and really, I was just completely wrong about what sort of game I was getting myself into. Yes, it has that Diablo inspiration at times, but above all, this is a Darksiders experience. It wasn't this careless spin-off or afterthought to keep the franchise present in people's minds. This was an honest-to-God great Darksiders journey and one of my favourite games to release in 2019. But will I feel the same way about it today? I know 2 going on 3 years isn't a whole heap of time between playthroughs or since release. I mean, we've covered games 20 years old at this point, but what excited me the most about revisiting Darksiders Genesis today was 2 factors that weren't present the first time around. First of all, the rest of the series was almost but a distant memory, with the clearest point of reference being the disappointed feeling I was left with by Darksiders 3, which I've since gone on to revisit and really enjoyed. And secondly, do I think this game is as incredible without, well, terrible expectations going in? Now that I finally finished revisiting Darksiders Genesis, it's time to put all that love and praise I just went over to the test and answer, is Darksiders Genesis as good as I remember? Let's find out. Just quickly before we get started, as I said, this is now my last video on the Darksiders series so far, so if you've just found the channel, I recommend catching up on this series of retrospectives. Click the link in the top right hand corner or in the description below for the playlist, and what the hell, subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Alright, let's get started. As the name implies, Darksiders Genesis is set, well, at the beginning, before the events of the previous 3 games. The game is set at some point soon after the Horsemen were gifted their powers from the Charred Council in exchange for annihilating their own kind in the Nephilim in what ended up being a bloody battle on Eden. After this battle, war and strife are once again summoned by the Council, being tasked with a new mission. The Council suspects the Demon King Lucifer is planning something evil that involves the Demon Lord Samael that threatens to upset the balance. So the Council sends Strife and War to investigate. Upon invading Samael's keep, the 2 horsemen find it under attack from another Master of Hell, though apparently a lesser one, Moloch. Samael tells our duo that he is not in on Lucifer's plan and hence has resulted in this attack. Before he can elaborate though, Moloch attacks and Samael transports the horseman to the Void in order to speak with his associate, Vulgrim. In the Void, Vulgrim informs War and Strife that he can help them track down Lucifer, but he requires several artifacts. So once we go out and gather all those bits and bobs, Vulgrim tells the horsemen that Lucifer has paid a visit to another Master of Hell, Mammon, At this point, Samael enters the void and suggests that the horsemen find Mammon and force him to talk about Lucifer and his plans. When our duo find Mammon, they see he has several relics and weapons from Eden, and after killing him, the horsemen return to Vulgrim and Samael and learn exactly how Mammon got his hands on those types of treasures. Lucifer has opened a path to Eden and is turning its sacred water and turning it into poison. The demon Belial is the head of this operation, so we go out, stop him, but spare him from death because he actually gave them some information. After the horsemen leave though, Lucifer arrives and punishes Belial anyway, so probably wished he'd just been finished off by the horsemen. From Belial's information though, Strife and War learned that Dagon, the drowned king, is another demon under Lucifer's umbrella who has been offered Eden in exchange for his help. When the horsemen arrive on Eden, we quickly meet Abaddon, the guardian angel of Eden. It's from Abaddon we learned that Lucifer is spreading corruption in Eden and asks for their help in cleansing Eden. So that's what we do along the way, tracking down and killing Dagon. We return to the Void where Samael advises us to destroy the source of Moloch's power before they attack him, as he was much more powerful than he had any right being when he faced off with Samael. They do exactly that, and with Samael, Strife and War attack and kill Moloch, but before he dies, Moloch tells the horsemen that Lucifer's plan is already finished, and Samael knows what it is. Returning to the Void once more, Samael tells us that Lucifer had asked for the souls of the Masters of Hell in exchange for their services. He also mentions that Lilith is plotting with Lucifer as well, and together they created an artifact called the Animus, which is fueled by the souls of both the Masters of Heaven and Hell, who had accepted Lucifer's offer. Said artifact is corrupting mankind on Earth as we speak, turning them into the volatile and self-destructive species they would grow to become later on. The horsemen head to Earth to find mankind living in sin and realize that they helped Lucifer achieve this. Lucifer talks to Strife and War through a human child and tells us that the corruption of mankind is spreading and cannot be stopped. Afterwards, they return to the Charred Council, who declare that mankind needs to be watched as a third kingdom. They then forge the Seven Seals as a treaty to uphold the balance between heaven and hell, 3 of them coming from the demonic planes and 3 of them coming from the angelic keeps and 1 from the council itself. They declare whoever breaks the treaty shall suffer the wrath of the horsemen, which sets the stage for the future games, and that's the story for Darksiders Genesis. Okay, I'm gonna get this out of the way before I start gushing over this story. The main story plot, or general objective in Genesis, is sort of meh. Lucifer's got a plan. Plan's bad for the balance, so we need to try and stop it. I'll be honest, the plot itself centering around Lucifer anyways isn't why I love this story. It sort of just gives us an excuse to go after and hunt down various demon lords in search of Lucifer. Nothing wrong with that, but it's sort of what the main plot synopsis centered around, and I don't think that's Genesis's story's strong point. This story's strength comes from Strife and War's interactions, how they are processing the recent decimation of the Nephilim by their own hands, dealing with the helpful, not so helpful demons in Samael and Vulgrim, and learning about the aftermath of the Battle of Eden. Strife and War's relationship though really carries this story to great heights because their chemistry is just impeccable. Strife is just such a likable protagonist, and the way he goes back and forth with his brother in both a joking and banter sort of way and serious moments of reflection are great qualities that make me want to go out and find these extra dialogue opportunities. A lot of War and Strife's best moments of interaction aren't moments that every player is guaranteed to experience because they mostly are optional, which I don't necessarily think was the right move because of how great these conversations between the two brothers are. Whether it's Strife poking fun at War for his lack of humour or the Council's always right attitude, to moments like when Strife is reflecting on the Battle of Eden and his regrets and questions, and it's through these moments you really do connect with both the horsemen. Again, they're just really likable and brilliantly performed by both Liam O'Brien and Chris Jai Alex, and honestly, it's their story and how they deal with both the past and the present that truly invested me in this story as a whole. Speaking of performances, once again we just have an absolutely star-studded cast with the likes of Troy Baker returning as Abaddon, Phil Lamar and Vernon Wells back as Volgrim and Samael. Keith David's in this game as the Demon Lord Moloch. I'd need more Keith David in my video games. I mean, the pedigree on display here is astounding, and what I love most about these characters, both new and old, is they have so much more to work with. I've let it be known in my other videos on the series, but it's been a minute since the characters had that same swagger, same charisma as the characters of the original, and I think Genesis absolutely nailed it. We get more time with the demons Volgrim and Samael to further that feeling of, why exactly are they helping us, because there is something funky going on here. There has to be. Samael and Volgrim are again such interesting characters, and whilst being helpful again to strife and war, I do not trust them one bit. I'm literally just waiting for them to bite me in the ass, but obviously being the beginning of the series, that doesn't happen. As I said though, they just have that charisma, and the fact that, well, even though we don't trust them, we can't really do all that much without them. It's a great dynamic in the relationship between Horseman and Demon that all these years later is still compelling. I really enjoyed seeing Abaddon again and getting, even though slight, more backstory into his character and relationship with the Horseman. To Abaddon, they're just uber powerful Nephilim, and after the Battle of Eden, yeah, he's not a fan, but through helping him rid corruption and poison from his home, he does ever so slightly warm up to you. Then you have the various demon lords who again are performed amazingly and provide further insight into our horseman or Lucifer and his plans. Look, if you couldn't tell, once again the characters in Genesis carry this story. The actual quest of stopping Lucifer is sort of whatever. I mean, it does a good job of setting up the world of Darksiders, which for a game titled Genesis is sort of a must, but whether it be War, Strife, Samael, Volgrim, Dis, the various angel and demon lords, whoever it may be, they are the compelling and intriguing aspect of this story and carry it to what is, for me at least, one of the standout stories in the series. Strife and War's relationship is just so damn interesting and engaging, it's hard for me not to just gush about the story. I do have one issue with Genesis though, or more or less the series as a whole, and that is, what's next? We still haven't experienced any further story after the events of Darksiders 1, and we're 4 games deep at this point. I used to think it was because Vigil or Gunfire or Airship was setting up what the other Horsemen were doing around the same time, but well, Genesis throws that out the window because we still don't really know what Strife had been up to except for his cameo in 3. I just think we can't keep going back in this series, and Darksiders 4 is the perfect opportunity to continue the story from Darksiders 1 with all 4 of the Horsemen. But that's more of a general series complaint than directly Genesis's issue, and look, at the end of the day, again, this story's primary purpose is to set up the gameplay and those badass moments, which it does perfectly. If I had to boil down what it feels like to play Darksiders Genesis, it would be very different to what you may think if you've never played it, because at a glance, it looks Diablo-esque or maybe something like Torchlight, but that's not really the case. When you boil it down, Darksiders Genesis feels like a Darksiders game that you play from a top-down perspective. There are more changes than that obviously, and as is the case, the gameplay for this series already sort of changed from game to game due to how the Horsemen play, but in its entirety, I feel very comfortable saying Genesis still feels like I'm playing Darksiders. You have the hack and slash combat, wrath and horseman abilities, platforming, puzzles to a limited extent, dungeons, and big ol' boss fights. The pillars of the Darksiders formula are all still here, and honestly, they're just as fun as ever. As was the case back when I played the game at release, it did take me a mission or two to fully invest into the gameplay, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's still a lot of fun to play, and despite the change in camera angle, it feels like it belongs in the Darksiders series. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's start the breakdown, as always, beginning with combat. Unlike the rest of the series, I have to break down two styles of combat in regards to Genesis, because War and Strife do play very differently from one another. For this playthrough, however, I did play solo, and for that reason, I did primarily stick to playing as Strife just because he is the new horseman and I'd already played as War before. So let's get War's playstyle out of the way now, and then I can dive deep into the changes Strife makes to Darksiders combat. War essentially is the War we remember playing in the original Darksiders. He's an up-close and personal brawler, still has great hacking and slashing combinations with a few wrath abilities we've also seen before, and his War mode, but now with the added bonus of these elemental effects that, well, the description's in the name. They add fire or death touch to your attacks, that sort of thing. When you're participating in combat as War, it's very similar to the combat you remember from the original, just again with that top-down perspective. There's no crazy changes here. I didn't dislike playing as War, in fact, it's when playing as him that the Darksiders muscle memory sort of kicks in, but mostly what I said in my Darksiders retrospective applies in Genesis. Strife, on the other hand, is a very different beast compared to all the other horsemen we've played because his strength is ranged combat given his primary weapons are his two pistols, and it's through Strife where you could compare the combat to a bit more of a twin-stick shooter. Strife does have some close-quarter combat options that progressively get stronger through buying combinations and upgrades through Dis, but they aren't his strongest assets, which is evident through Strife's elemental upgrades being unique bullets. Whether it be electricity, shooting out black holes, a charged shot, laser beam, a sort of shotgun that causes enemies to also drop health on impact, lava shots, etc. On top of all this though, Strife is rewarded frequently for kills with almost a mega version of these bullets that, well, deal more damage or provide a quicker reload in between shots for bullets like the charge shots or a flamethrower or a compact shotgun, or just being all around quicker to fire like the standard bullets. You have a lot of options in regards to Strife's combat, but primarily those options are focusing on the pistols and as a result, ranged combat. Strife's wrath abilities are further proof, with one focusing on leaving a shadow clone behind to both damage and distract enemies so Strife can get to a safe distance, or an uber laser beam that practically takes up the whole screen. Again, Strife isn't useless in close quarters and you can still hack, slash and dice up lesser enemies that way too, but that's sort of why you have War. In regards to how it feels to play as Strife though, it's amazing. The twin stick shooting is super solid and easy to snap from one enemy to another. Strife is quick but also elusive because, again, through upgrades, if you time dodges perfectly, he can also leave a clone in his dust. The ability to have two different elements equipped at once means you can constantly change up how you attack at a distance, adding that much needed variety. Horse combat is back and honestly feels like a big old cheese to shoot enemies at a distance with seemingly more damage for whatever reason, but possibly the most badass element to Strife's combat is his ultimate mode. My god, is this thing broken, and I love it. You can decimate bosses' health bars, obliterate hundreds of enemies in seconds, and you know what? It feels great to be able to do that. Strife is not this tanky protagonist, and if you're caught lacking, maybe get too comfortable closer range, or aren't looking out for enemies' cues, or simply get swarmed, you are done. Strife is not exactly a glass cannon, but it's a different sort of feeling compared to the other horsemen. You want it to be close and personal with War, Death, and Fury, so enemies in your face didn't have the same reaction as when enemies close in on Strife. When that happens, you need to be able to crowd control, weave in and out of attacks hoping to give yourself enough time to get good distance, which the enemies do not make easy. I'm not going to sit here and say Darksiders Genesis is a necessarily difficult game, because outside of the final boss, I didn't have both War and Strife die causing a reset. But that doesn't mean Strife didn't take a fair few falls along the way. Obviously, I wasn't playing the ideal solo playstyle and let War handle more enclosed encounters and use Strife for when I need distance. I'd say that's your ideal playstyle if you're going at this game solo, but I did pretty well with just Strife. He took some punishment for sure, and the bigger enemy encounters are no less tense, because for me, if Strife went down, I'm essentially completely changing up my playstyle on the fly, waiting for him to come back. This mechanic does limit the stress of failure for sure, because as long as you can maintain composure for 20 seconds or so, you're right back to two horsemen, but it's a great way to make the player mix it up between the two characters and try to get them to play to Strife and War's strengths. The combat though is just a good time. The variety is here, the hacking and slashing is still here, the badass moments are definitely still here, and all of this while adding the new twin stick mechanics and changing the perspective doesn't change the fact that it still feels like I'm participating in a Darksiders style of combat. I cannot emphasize this point enough, because at a glance it looks like the perspective changes a lot, and it really doesn't. It's still great fun to wail on enemies in a plethora of ways through the various upgrades from Dis and dodging in and out of combat, getting out of encounters with barely a scratch. This all feels great to play, and with the upgrades from Vulgrim and Dis requiring both souls and boatman coins that are so vital to the combat progression, it helps the player want to go out and explore these levels and locales really well. I do, however, have an issue, not so much with the combat, but sort of related, and that is the power level. In Darksiders Genesis, both War and Strife have their own power level that goes up through having more upgrades, more health, but mostly through having more creature cores. Now, creature cores drop from, well, creatures and have a variety of stat boosts that you apply to this creature core tree. The more you have, the more your power goes up, and each mission has a power suggestion. It's not a requirement to meet that power level suggestion, but in my opinion, it all feels sort of irrelevant or arbitrary. Now, I want to be clear, I didn't test out just no power or anything like that in the later levels, but in the early game, I was frequently under the recommendation and it didn't seem to affect much. It's not a massive issue, but it gets highlighted so frequently that you'd think if you're under the recommended level that you'd be in for a world of hurt, and I didn't experience that. Just sort of felt like a number, because even when I was hundreds above the recommended, I'm not absolutely invincible or wiping out enemies in an instant, you know? Again, not a huge issue because it doesn't noticeably impact the combat, making it a blast to play regardless, but just a system I found to be a bit strange. Where the combat comes to a head, or at least forces the player to use all the tools in their belt, all the lessons that they've learned thus far though, is in the game's many boss fights. Now, each mission in Genesis has at least one boss fight, so give or take, that's at least 16 boss encounters, and obviously, I'm not going to go into detail about every single battle. I'm mainly avoiding detailing every single boss because some early game big bosses reappear later on in a mini boss fashion, such as the Slug Demon or the Legion Bolt Spitter. All the bosses are good fun and provide intense moments that are beautifully accompanied by this game's soundtrack. I mean, damn, it goes hard. But I want to focus on the 5 main boss fights because I do believe they are, well, the cream of the crop, and they also don't reappear in more standard enemy fashion. Outside of these 5 battles though, I do just want to quickly shout out the tutorial boss in the Hollow Fiend, because these sorts of battles are important for the player. You want to give the player a sense of power, but also teach them tools and ways to play the game that will expand further the longer they play, and I think the Hollow Fiend nails both of these. One, it's a big boss, so the power fantasy of slaying something like that is there by default, but it isn't a pushover fight. It's not one of the hardest fights, but he has a good amount of attacks, they're well telegraphed, and give the player enough time to learn what everything does, but at least from a more purely strife perspective, it teaches the player the importance of distance with an enemy that is stationary. The Fiend can attack basically the entire arena, but he is also always in the same spot, allowing the player to learn the dashes and ranged attacks required for general combat. That's the purpose really of a lot of the bosses I won't be going over. The more mini or lesser boss battles are all trying to teach you mechanics for either general combat or what the big bad demons and angel may use in their fights, whilst at the same time giving you a sense of power by defeating them. Anyway, tutorial and other bosses out of the way, the first real boss is against the demon Mammon, which is a good first test. Mammon is quite rangy in his attacks as well, but he can disappear and reappear quite quickly, and also summons these tombstones that constantly summon enemies until destroyed, which is easier said than done. A mirror that clones himself, and in general his attacks can appear almost bullet hell-like. It's just the right amount of chaos for the player's first big battle in my opinion. Mammon can do quite a bit of damage to you if you aren't careful, but also most of his attacks aren't centered around him actually attacking you. If you can keep an eye out for which one is the real Mammon, dodge and weave through the projectiles, make sure he hasn't gone underground, and utilize Strife's ultimate mode effectively, unlike myself, then he will go down without too much issue. It's a tense encounter, but not overly challenging. Just try not to get distracted by the fluff of the things on screen and you'll slay the first demon lord. The next big demon we encounter is Belial, who feels like a noticeable step up from Mammon. Belial, despite his size, is deceptively quick, has a good number of ranged and close combat attacks, big AoE attacks, can heal up from time to time unless you can stop him from eating enemies along with summoning enemies to avert our gaze, and has these crystals which can only be taken out with War's Crossblade, forcing the player to mix and match the horsemen. Luckily, Belial's health pool isn't insane, as you feel like you can do a fair bit of damage to him frequently, but when you pair all these elements together as well as the small arena, this is a tricky battle. Luckily, Belial's attacks don't vary too much from phase to phase, but still, he deals big damage and can force you into corners quickly that makes him a really satisfying boss to take out. Then, in the very next mission, we come up against the corrupted angel Astarte, who seems unassuming as she rides around on her horse summoning enemies. But damn, is she a tough battle. First of all, she can essentially one-hit kill our horsemen if you aren't careful. She summons an absurd amount of enemies that you need to be focusing on if you don't want the battle to get out of hand, and when she can be attacked, she has a huge health pool. It's one of the simpler fights in terms of her attacks and ways she deals damage, but damn, she had me on the edge of my seat constantly, waiting for my horsemen to revive, and I like that feeling in my bosses. Makes beating them even sweeter. Then we come up against the demon Dagon, who gives off major Ursula vibes. Dagon, for being so late in the game, is once again a bit more of a sitting target, more so about taking care of the enemies, watching out for the tentacle slams, whirlpools, and oh yeah, the tsunamis he summons as well that threaten to push you off of the arena. Dagon as a fight is alright, a bit more flash than substance, which isn't a terrible quality, it's just not the most challenging, which is strange for the second last boss, and a weird way to lead into by far the toughest encounter in the game against Moloch. Moloch is a tough battle. It was the only fight that flat out killed me multiple times and got a genuine fuck you when I defeated him in excitement. Moloch is quick, the arena is relatively small, and that ultimate mode doesn't do much to whittle down that health bar. He does have some BS though. When he engulfs the arena in exploding crystals, say all you want, I have no idea where to go, and I died mostly due to this attack. He doesn't have a lot of fluff to his attacks, he's not really trying to distract you, and because of that, it's a much more mono-e-mono fight, and it's just tough. He is lightning quick, does so much damage, puts you on the back foot with great frequency, and most of his attacks are fair. Again, that arena engulfing one, at least personally, I have no clue what's going on, but overall, he's a fair but extremely tough fight and really does earn the right to be the final fight in the game. Again, there are more battles than just the main 5, but as a whole, they're just all good fun. The main battles may more often than not be more tense encounters, but each one has their own strategies and tricks that make them a lot of fun to tackle and defeat. They're also mostly very gameplay oriented and not so much worried about the spectacle because that comes with the bright lights and all that on screen. I really enjoyed the bosses in Genesis. They hit that balance of power trip, spectacle and challenge really well, and I cannot emphasize this enough. The soundtrack that accompanies these bosses and combat encounters is what helps these moments feel as epic or badass as they do. It's this time around in the video where I go on and say there is more to Genesis than just the combat, and where that is true, it's still a whole lot of combat. Now this was something I went over in my Darksiders 3 retrospective, and in a way I think was a big reason why 3 didn't feel like a true Darksiders experience. So what's different about Genesis? Why does Genesis still feel like a true to form Darksiders experience even with a heavy emphasis on combat? Here's the thing with Genesis's gameplay flow. You'll be facing off against enemies quite a bit. I mean, even in the more open levels, as soon as you mount your horse and head just down the road, you're usually coming up against some sort of foe. So yes, a good majority of the levels do center around fighting off demons or angels, but that's not to say the platforming challenges or puzzles don't exist. Those moments just also have some form of combat, either in those moments or very shortly after. The breaks from combat are much shorter than say a Darksiders or Darksiders 2, but also you have to take into consideration that the gameplay is much more broken up than before. The levels don't flow from one to another and they only last between 30 minutes to an hour, and because of that the combat feels more present than maybe it otherwise would be. With all that being said though, the other elements in regards to Genesis are no less fine-tuned and incorporated into the level progression. As I said, you still have a number of dungeons, you have open level design, some even with multiple paths of progression, you have side objectives and missions, collectibles to hunt down and, well, collect. Platforming and puzzles, all that sort of stuff is still here, and really well done to boot. The only lacking element in my opinion is the puzzles, as there is some, but not a bunch at least, that I can vividly recall. The puzzles I do recall felt more like platforming challenges than actual puzzles, like the time gates with multiple switches to reach a grand prize, but outside of that, and maybe a few others I'm forgetting, it feels like the weakest link in the gameplay features. Puzzles aside though, the levels themselves are so tightly designed and varied in appearance to boot. You have plenty of secrets, collectibles, and extra objectives to seek out and complete. The platforming gets plenty of time to shine through those secrets with tricky platforming challenges that involve both Strife and War special abilities, and in general, despite the heavy emphasis on combat, once you clear out areas, you just want to stick around, see what you can find, whether it be a secondary entrance or a trickster door, boatman coins, chests filled with souls, or maybe a mimic to say screw you. It's just a lot of well-tuned, enjoyable to be in levels that expand a playtime of a level that should be 15 or so minutes to upwards of an hour. It's the way these levels are designed though that encourages the player to go back and revisit them. You want to go back, fully explore everything these locales have to offer, and for a game that clearly wants the player to stick around after the fact is a great quality. With that being said, when I finished up with the battle against Moloch, I'd explored about as much as I could in these levels, and the arena wave mode doesn't entice me to stick around, so I had enough when it was all said and done, but that's not something I have an issue with. I know it was an issue people brought up around launch with a lack of an endgame, but that's just not something I personally have a problem with because I'm happy to play a game, finish it, and then move on. As a whole though, the gameplay for Darksiders Genesis is spectacular. It's so different and yet so similar to what a Darksiders experience should play like. The perspective really doesn't change anything. The hacking and slashing still feels great, the twin stick-esque shooting, the combat variety is finely tuned, the boss fights are great fun and test your abilities and concentration in all the right ways, the levels are so well designed and constantly varied, the platforming is top notch. Really my only complaint is the lack of, I'll say, obvious puzzles and maybe slightly less combat to allow for more breaks with platforming and puzzles. But overall, Genesis is just a good time to play, and the 10 or so hours I spent playing the game just flew by as a result. So, was Darksiders Genesis as good as I remembered? Yeah, it was, but then again, it's only been a couple of years, so that's to be expected. I think Darksiders Genesis's biggest weakness is that on the surface it looks like a spin-off or just simply so different from the rest of the series, and even though that isn't the case, it is something that I'm sure has pushed fans away from giving this title a go. The story is another prequel, but the chemistry between War and Strife makes this story an amazing experience. The combat is smooth, the bosses are great, the levels are spectacular, and most importantly, it all feels so true to the Darksiders formula or experience, just in a different way. Genesis shows that Darksiders can take on many forms, and yet stay true to what made this series so great. It's for that reason that I must say, if you're a fan of Darksiders and skip Genesis, I strongly recommend you give the game a go. It may take a level or two to get into, but I promise it is worth it. Airship did something really special with Genesis, and despite the change visually, the game still feels as Darksiders as ever. But this is it for Darksiders for now. I am begging either Airship or Gunfire Games though, progress the story forward now. Darksiders 4 sets the title up beautifully for all the horsemen to come together, use that original concept and make something truly special. I'll be waiting, excited to see what all you talented people come up with, but for now, this is it for the Darksiders series. Thank you all so much for watching my Darksiders Genesis retrospective. I had a lot of fun revisiting Darksiders Genesis. Really, the whole series has been a joy to come back to, and I hope you enjoyed revisiting this game and series with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on Darksiders Genesis or the series in general, as well as any suggestions for games you want to see covered in the future. Shout out to the channel members Ish, France, Christian, and Cloud for that extra level of support. I truly do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Go give my socials a follow if you fancy at MayorHairBear. Join the Discord server to have a chat, and I'll catch you all in the next video.